They said Africa could not build without permission. They said we would always need someone else's money, someone else's language, someone else's blessing. But one nation, one small, unbroken nation, has stood up and said, "No more." Burkina Faso has done what few thought possible. In the face of pressure, in the shadow of centuries of control, it has built Africa's first 100% local bank. No foreign hands, no colonial strings. Only African minds, African sweat, and African pride. And at the heart of this storm stands a man unshaken, a soldier turned servant, a leader forged in resistance, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He did not bow, he did not beg, he built. This is not just about finance, it is about freedom. Not just about a nation, it is about a people finally remembering who they are. So if you can feel that fire, if you know in your bones that Africa is rising, then subscribe, my brother, my sister. Because what happened in Burkina Faso is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of a revolution. Let me take you there. To the heart of West Africa, to a land of red earth and relentless spirit, Burkina Faso. It was the 2nd day of August, 2024. The sun rose heavy and golden over Ouagadougou. The people gathered not for war, not for protest, but for something far greater, a birth. Before their eyes stood a new building, modest in size but monumental in meaning. Burkindlim, the first bank in Africa to be built, owned, and governed entirely by its own people. No IMF signatures, no World Bank oversight, no French approval. Just the steady heartbeat of a nation reclaiming its dignity. And standing at the front, his posture calm, his eyes aflame, was Captain Ibrahim Traoré. A man barely in his 30s, yet already carrying the weight of generations on his shoulders. He spoke softly that day, but his words thundered across the continent. We no longer borrow our destiny, we build it. It was more than a statement. It was a resurrection. For decades, the story of Burkina Faso had been written by others, by foreign investors, colonial accountants, and international lenders who measured worth in currency, not courage. But on that day, under that sun, a nation rewrote its own chapter. Burkindlim was not born out of comfort. It was forged through sanctions, isolation, and the defiance of a people who refused to bend. After cutting ties with France and distancing itself from the CFA franc system, Burkina Faso found itself standing alone, surrounded by skeptics, warned by economists that such independence would be its downfall. But to Captain Traoré, dependence was the real death. He knew that freedom without financial sovereignty was only half of freedom, so he chose the harder road. The government of Burkina Faso gathered its brightest minds, economists, engineers, community leaders, and told them, "Build something of our own." And they did. Stone by stone, idea by idea, franc by franc. The bank's creation was not merely economic policy, it was a spiritual act. It told every farmer, every teacher, every mother selling fruit in the market, you are not powerless, your labor has value, your dreams have currency. That message traveled far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso. From Dakar to Dar es Salaam, from Accra to Atlanta, black men and women whispered to one another, "Did you hear what they did? Did you hear what Burkina just built?" Because it wasn't just about money. It was about memory. A memory of a time when Africa traded in gold and grain, not in permission slips and loans. A time when our worth was not decided in Paris or Washington, but in the sweat of our own hands. Burkindlim became a mirror reflecting a question back to the world. What does true independence look like? And in that reflection stood a young soldier who dared to answer it. Traoré didn't create this bank for profit. He built it for proof. Proof that Africans could govern, manage, and trust their own economic destiny. Proof that a generation raised under the shadow of debt could still rise and declare, "We are enough." As the ribbon was cut and the crowd erupted, elders in the audience wept, not out of nostalgia, but out of recognition. They had seen this dream before, in the eyes of Sankara, in the vision of Nkrumah, in the speeches of Lumumba. But this time, it wasn't just words on a microphone. It was a building, a living institution. Concrete proof that the spirit of African sovereignty was not dead. It was reborn. For the rest of the world, it was a news headline. For the people of Burkina Faso, it was a heartbeat returning to life. And somewhere, deep in the soil of that red land, you could almost hear the ancestors whispering, "We told you, freedom never dies, it only waits." But as the drums of celebration faded, one question began to echo across Africa and beyond. Would the world let this dream live? Or would they try to crush it, like they always have? When the news broke, it traveled faster than the Harmattan winds. From Ouagadougou to Bamako, from the villages of Ghana to the churches of Harlem, people whispered, "Have you seen what Captain Ibrahim Traoré has done?" For some, it was disbelief. For others, it was deliverance. In the streets of Burkina Faso, music filled the air. Drums, laughter, ululations that felt like victory songs sung after centuries of silence. Women in colorful head wraps danced outside the new Burkindlim building. Old men lifted their hands to the sky, tears tracing the lines of their faces. They weren't celebrating a bank. They were celebrating a return of dignity. And at the center of it all stood Traoré, calm, composed, but with eyes burning like an old prophet who had finally seen the promised land. The local media called it a miracle. But in the foreign press, the tone was different. Headlines whispered warnings. Burkina Faso risks isolation. The junta's dangerous move. A threat to economic stability. Western analysts sat in TV studios, shaking their heads, questioning how a small nation could possibly survive without the old systems. But Traoré never flinched. He looked into the cameras and said, "They said we couldn't feed ourselves. Now we grow our own food. They said we couldn't defend ourselves. Now we guard our own skies. And now they say we can't bank ourselves. We shall see." It was a declaration of war, not with weapons, but with will. For the global South, his words were music. In Niger, Mali, Guinea, leaders and citizens alike watched with newfound hope. In France, silence turned into discomfort. In Washington, curiosity turned into concern. And for millions across the African diaspora, from Chicago to Kingston, from London to Lagos, his name became a prayer on their lips. Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He was no longer just a soldier or a head of state. He had become a symbol of defiance, of youth, of what it means to believe again. But with every symbol comes struggle. Within weeks of Burkindlim's opening, sanctions loomed. Foreign investors hesitated. Aid agencies paused their partnerships. The old financial order, threatened by a new voice, began to tighten its grip. Yet something unexpected happened. Instead of retreating, Burkina Faso's people stepped forward. Citizens lined up to open accounts. Local farmers pledged to keep their savings in Burkindlim. The message was clear. If the world won't back us, we'll back ourselves. Across social media, hashtags spread like wildfire. Build our own. Africa for Africans. Traoré the torch. A continent that had long waited for a leader to act was finally seeing one do it. And through it all, Traoré refused luxury or privilege. He lived simply, dressed modestly, spoke with restraint, as if to remind everyone that leadership is not about comfort, it's about conviction. One reporter described meeting him in person. He spoke softly, like a teacher. But behind his calm was an ocean of certainty. You could feel it. He believes every word. And belief, in times like these, is more powerful than any weapon. In the United States, Burkina Faso news started trending for the first time in decades. African Americans saw in Traoré something familiar, a reflection of every ancestor who had stood tall against oppression, from Harriet Tubman to Malcolm X. Churches in Atlanta preached sermons about him. Barbershops in Detroit debated his boldness. He had awakened a sleeping pride, not just for a nation, but for a people scattered across continents. Yet, in the midst of this praise, a shadow lingered. Analysts warned, the West won't let this stand. And deep inside, Traoré knew, history is never kind to those who choose freedom over fear. Still, he stood. Still, he led. Still, he believed. And as he gazed upon the crowd one evening, a journalist overheard him whisper, "If they fear our freedom, then it means we are truly free." But as Burkina Faso celebrated its awakening, forces beyond its borders began to move, silent, powerful, and unrelenting. The question now was not if they would respond, but how far they would go to stop this rising flame. Change, real change, is never quiet. It hums through the markets, the classrooms, the dusty streets where children play barefoot and dream without knowing they are part of something historic. In the months after Burkina opened its doors, Burkina Faso began to feel that hum. It wasn't loud, it wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. It was alive. Small farmers in the villages of Bobo Dioulasso found they could finally borrow money without losing their land. Mothers running street stalls no longer had to beg for foreign coins to restock their goods. Teachers received salaries in full, on time, paid through their own national system. And across the country, a phrase began to echo from one mouth to another. This is ours. Burkina became more than a bank. It became a mirror reflecting who the Burkinabe truly were: resourceful, proud, patient, unbreakable. Yet, as hope bloomed, hardship lingered. Inflation pressed hard. The international community, uneasy with this new independence, tightened its purse strings. Aid projects slowed. Imports became costlier. And in the capital, Ouagadougou, the nights grew quieter, the kind of quiet that follows courage. Foreign media called it economic isolation, but the people called it the price of dignity. In the countryside, a grandmother named Miriam was asked how she felt about the changes. She smiled, her eyes tired but bright, and said, "For 60 years they told us to wait for help, wait for hope. Now we don't wait anymore, we work, and that is enough." That's what this revolution was, not a shout of anger, but a whisper of ownership. The whisper of a nation finally believing its labor mattered. Even the skeptics began to soften. Bankers who had once criticized Traoré's move found themselves visiting Burkina, curious about how this impossible idea was actually functioning. They saw queues of people, young and old, depositing small savings, opening accounts, investing in a dream they could touch. Traoré's government released reports showing rising participation in local finance and increasing trust in national institutions. For the first time in decades, the people didn't feel like strangers in their own economy. But it wasn't easy. There were shortages, setbacks, sacrifices. There were days when frustration outweighed faith, when people wondered if defying the world was worth the hunger it sometimes brought. And that's when Traoré did something few leaders ever do. He listened. He traveled through towns, sat with elders, broke bread with students. He reminded them that freedom has a cost, and that the generations before had paid with blood, not just discomfort. In one televised address, he said, "Independence is not a holiday, it is a duty. Every seed we plant today is for a harvest our children will eat." The speech struck a chord, not only in Burkina Faso, but across the continent. From Nairobi to New Orleans, people shared his words, calling him the voice of a new Africa. He had become something larger than politics, a spiritual leader in fatigues, preaching not from a pulpit but from principle. And while global powers watched uneasily, something remarkable unfolded. Burkina Faso's economy began to adapt. Local industries sprouted. The young learned skills started businesses, believed again in building. Hope became habit. Yes, the nation still faced storms, financial, political, and moral. But this time, the people faced them standing tall, because they understood that poverty is not the absence of money, but the absence of control. And through Burkindlim, they were taking that control back, one transaction, one belief, one heartbeat at a time. In every sermon across the diaspora, in every Sunday prayer whispered by elders who had seen too much, the same truth echoed. Burkina Faso was paying the price for freedom, but for once it was paying in its own currency. And that, my friends, is priceless. But as Burkina Faso rebuilt from within, eyes from the outside grew sharper. Powerful nations watched this experiment with unease. The question on every diplomat's lips was the same. If Burkina succeeds, who will be next? Across the ocean, in a different world but a familiar struggle, people began to take notice. In New York, in Atlanta, in Chicago, the name Burkina Faso started echoing in conversations where it hadn't been spoken in generations. On black radio stations, callers said it with pride. They're doing it for real. They're building what we've been dreaming of. And in barbershops across America, the talk turned from sports to sovereignty, from celebrity to courage. Because deep down, every man who has ever been told he is less, every woman who has ever been told to wait her turn, understood exactly what Captain Ibrahim Traoré was doing. It wasn't just about a bank. It was about a people remembering how to walk tall again. You see, for centuries, the black world has shared the same wound, carved by power, polished by propaganda. But what happened in Burkina Faso struck at the heart of that history. It whispered across generations, across oceans, you can stand, you can build, you can be free. And that whisper found its way into black churches on Sunday mornings. Pastors lifted their voices, drawing parallels between Traoré's stand and the prophets of old, between the dusty streets of Ouagadougou and the march on Selma, between the courage of a young African soldier and the dream of Martin Luther King Jr. Because the truth is, freedom speaks the same language everywhere. In Europe, journalists called it a dangerous precedent. In Washington, analysts debated whether this was a threat to stability. But in the hearts of black people around the world, it wasn't danger they saw, it was deliverance. Traoré had done what so many only preached. He acted. And that action broke something open, not just in Africa, but in every soul that had grown tired of waiting for permission to rise. He reminded us that sovereignty isn't just about borders, it's about belief. It's about reclaiming the story that was stolen, the dignity that was discounted, the future that was delayed. That's why, for millions watching from afar, this was not just Burkina Faso news. It was a signal flare, a message written across the African sky that said, "We are not done, we are not broken, we are becoming." And as the world watched, you could almost feel the pulse of something ancient returning, a quiet, steady rhythm beneath the noise of modern life. The same rhythm that carried slaves through the fields, that carried preachers through marches, that now carries a soldier through history. But every rhythm faces resistance. And the question that now echoes from Harlem to Ouagadougou is this: if one man's courage can awaken a continent, what will it take to keep that fire alive? The winds of change do not rest. They move through the plains, through the cities, through the hearts of men and women who dare to dream beyond fear. And now, in the red soil of Burkina Faso, those winds are still moving, carrying with them a question, a challenge, a calling. What comes next? Captain Ibrahim Traoré knows the road ahead will not be smooth. The storms of politics, the temptations of power, the whispers of betrayal, they will all come. Every revolution must face its season of testing. But this one feels different, because it is not built on slogans, it is built on soul. Burkindlim was never about walls of concrete or ledgers of money. It was about trust, about belief, about saying, "We can." That spirit, once awakened, is not easily put back to sleep. Already, young Africans across the continent are speaking his name, not as a president, not as a savior, but as a reminder that courage has no age and sovereignty has no apology. And beyond Africa, the echo continues. In classrooms in Detroit, teachers use Burkina Faso as a lesson in courage. In churches in London, preachers speak of a faith that moves mountains and systems alike. In quiet kitchens, elders tell their grandchildren, "One day we will build like them, for us, by us." That is the path forward. Not perfection, but persistence. Not wealth, but worth. Not dominance, but dignity. Burkina Faso's future will not be easy. No honest freedom ever is. But it will be theirs. And that changes everything. Because when a people start believing in their own reflection, no empire can rewrite their name again. The seeds are already planted, in policy, in pride, in the hearts of the next generation. And when they rise, they will not rise alone. Africa will rise with them. So as we look toward tomorrow, let us not ask if Burkina Faso will survive. Let us ask if the world is ready for what happens when Africa begins to believe in itself again. Because make no mistake, this is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning of a continent remembering its power, and a world realizing it can no longer look away. So here we stand, my brothers and sisters, at the edge of something new. Not just another headline, not just another moment lost to history, but a shift in the spirit of a people. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood before his nation and declared financial independence, he was not only speaking for Burkina Faso, he was speaking for every black soul that has ever been told to wait. He was speaking for every hand that built kingdoms, but owned no throne. For every voice that sang freedom, but was told to whisper. That day, a new rhythm began. And it beats still, in the markets of Ouagadougou, in the villages of Mali, in the churches of Harlem, in the streets of Kingston. A rhythm that says, we are no longer afraid to build our own. Some will say it's just Burkina Faso news, a passing moment, a headline soon forgotten. But those who truly listen, those who feel history in their bones, know better. They know that what began in Burkina Faso is part of something far larger, a rebirth of dignity, a return of pride, a revolution of self-worth. And when the next generation asks, who lit the flame? History will whisper one name again and again, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the man who dared to believe that Africa could rise without permission. So tonight, let us remember, freedom is not a gift, it is a choice, and every choice demands courage. If this story has touched something deep within you, if you believe that what happened in Burkina Faso matters to every black heart across this earth, then don't just watch. Be part of it. Hit that subscribe button, share this message, leave a comment. Tell us, do you believe Africa can truly stand on its own? Because this story isn't over. The revolution has only just begun. And when the world writes the next chapter, may they say, we were there when Africa stood tall again.